France. The country that has historically perfected the art of revolution, romance, really good bread, and this distinctive pentagonal territorial form. The history of France goes back to the ancient Gauls resisting Julius Caesar in the 1st century BC. And its modern borders are also still influenced by its ancient history, as we will see, especially with its southern Mediterranean border towards the Iberian Peninsula. So after having discussed the history of the border of several other countries, including Germany, England, and the US, in today's video, we are diving deep into the history of the territorial evolution of France to explain why its borders ended up where they are today. We will first briefly summarise the history of the northern territory of Normandy, then analyse France's northeastern and eastern borders from the border it shares with Belgium all the way down to the Mediterranean, and then talk about its southern border and its history with Spain, but also including the fascinating stories of its tiny neighbours Andorra and Monaco. Finally, we will also discuss the borders that France shares with other countries in its overseas territories, also explaining how these actually came to be. If you are interested in this mix-up of history and geography, or are interested in the video game and history approach we also often do, please don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel. That support will encourage YouTube to recommend this video to others who might be interested. And if you want to correct us, debate some of our assessments, or simply suggest ideas for new videos, please feel free to either do so in the comment section or join our Discord, linked underneath the video. And if you are in a position to support us further, we also have a Patreon, linked below. Now, you might think that it's weird that we start talking about France's northern border, because looking at the map, it's just the sea. But then you'd be forgetting about France's best frenemy in the whole world, England. The French region of Normandy, today an entité historique, géographique et culturelle, is roughly similar in shape to the historical Duchy of Normandy, which goes back to the 911 Treaty of Saint-Clair-sur-Epte. By the way, you're gonna have to deal with my schoolboy French pronunciation. If you want to complain, leave a comment and I won't get back to you. The name of this unique region actually comes from it being settled by Vikings, or Northmen, or Normans. This happened after Charles the Simple, king of the West Franks, gave the land to the Viking leader Hrothgar, or as the French called him for lack of Norse pronunciation skills, Rollo. The king of the West Franks did this because the Normans had been busy pillaging France for decades, and he didn't like that. So he said, how about you take this land for free, and then say I'm your king, and we'll all be happy chappies. Fast forward to 150 years, and the Normans had basically become a rough and violent hybrid of French and Nordic culture, and Rollo's successor, William the Bastard, conquers England in 1066, changing his epithet to William the Conqueror for history to remember him. I'm sure if you have a smidgen of interest in medieval history, you've heard this story before. However, when William the Conqueror became King of England, he retained control of the Duchy of Normandy, and despite technically still swearing allegiance to the French king, he essentially controlled it independently. Even though the concept of borders wasn't really a thing like it is today, we can imagine the northern border looking something like this. Over the next few hundred years, because the Norman and French nobility were so intertwined, various parts of France were controlled either by the King of France or the King of England. English control was at its height under Henry II, where Henry had inherited this much of northern France and then acquired all of Aquitaine from his marriage with Eleanor of Aquitaine in 1152. This is known by some historians as the Angevin Empire, relating to the fact that Henry's descendants hailed from Anjou. From 1340, King Edward III even started officially calling himself King of France, a trend that all the English kings found trendy literally until 1797, when the Kingdom of France no longer existed. To be fair, there was one point where Henry V got pretty close after the Battle of Agincourt in 1415, and even secured the inheritance of the French throne, but then he ruined it all by dying of dysentery and allowing his incompetent 8-month-old son, Henry VI, to inherit the throne. I should add that his incompetency wasn't fully realised as an infant, but later on in his life, where during his reign he basically lost the vast majority of lands that his father had secured. We could do a whole video on the 100 Years' War and the constant changing of territories between England and France, but that's not what this video is about. But interestingly, the last bit of territory that England controlled was Calais in 1558, when it was finally recaptured by the French. This actually makes the final iteration of France's northern border younger than some of its borders elsewhere, which we will discover later. Despite the English losing their last outpost on French soil, they still declared themselves King of France for another 250 years or so. Why would they do this? Did they truly believe that they would one day return to the continent to claim what they misguidedly believed was rightfully theirs? Probably not. I reckon they did it because of something all Brits can relate to throughout history: the inherent desire to piss off the French. Moving beyond medieval history, and looking at today's map of France, starting at the northernmost part of France's borders, the Wikipedia article about the Franco-Belgian border dates its existence back to the 1820 Treaty of Kortrijk. This was the treaty that confirmed the mutual borders between France and the United Kingdom. Wait, not that UK, I mean the United Kingdom of the Netherlands, a state that existed between 1815 and 1830 and included today's Netherlands, Belgium and Luxembourg. But as with most Wikipedia sources, it's not quite as simple as that. In fact, while the two countries bilaterally confirmed their borders at Kortrijk in 1820, the boundaries as they exist today had already been drawn at the Congress of Vienna and the subsequent Treaty of Paris in 1815, and even before that, at another Treaty of Paris in 1814. So to quickly get into why there was a Treaty of Paris 1814 and a Treaty of Paris 1815, these treaties ended the Napoleonic Wars, and in early 1815, Napoleon made a cheeky comeback attempt for what historians refer to as the 100 Days, or less epically, the War of the Seventh Coalition, during which Napoleon was finally defeated at the famous Battle of Waterloo, deposed and sent to the faraway island of St. Helena, rather than friendly Mediterranean Elba. And while both these treaties were somewhat fair and just towards France to prevent revisionist tendencies as we saw them over a century later with Germany, the second piece was understandably a bit harsher than the first. This is especially relevant for this first border in discussion, as Napoleon's final military campaign during these 100 days led his armies into modern-day Belgium, where in Waterloo, a suburb of Brussels, he was eventually stopped and defeated by a joint force of Brits, Germans and Dutch. As Dutch historian Beatrice de Graaf explains in her book Fighting Terror After Napoleon, it seemed quite a hard job for the newly established United Kingdom of the Netherlands to secure its front line against France. And after this incident in early 1815, when a French army just marched over the border so easily, it became clear that the Dutch needed a lot of support to secure this border, which came in the form of personnel, but also in the form of land, resulting in a more defensible front line. Thus, as de Graaf writes, with the Congress of Vienna and the Second Treaty of Paris, all the fortifications along France's northern border were officially apportioned to the Netherlands, plus those in Philippeville, Marienborg, and part of the district of Bouillon. So this middle section of the border, around the strategically important town of Philippeville, approximately from today's Hunels to Bouillon, is from the second, 1815 Treaty of Paris, and the sections before and after it date back to the Treaty of 1814, before Napoleon's desperate attempt at a comeback. The Treaty of Kortrijk, confirming the border and setting the legal grounds for border posts between Belgium and France, once again gained media attention in 2021 for quite an absurd incident. The border treaty was violated by a disgruntled Belgian farmer who wanted to enlarge his land. To achieve this, he simply moved one of the markers about 2 meters away into French territory, thus basically enlarging Belgium at the expense of France. However, an international escalation could fortunately be avoided by the mayors of the neighbouring Belgian and French villages, simply sending a letter to the farmer ordering him to move the stone back to its original location. The whole story even made it into the New York Times, titling it, "A Farmer Moved a 200-year-old Stone and the French-Belgian Border." Moving on to Luxembourg, its borders to France has a long, interesting and surprisingly well-documented history. The first time the two countries officially became neighbours was in 1552. we found a map of the Franco-Luxembourg border from 1610, where you can see that the town of Talange, nowadays a suburb of Metz in France, was part of the Duchy of Luxembourg. You have to adjust this map by flipping it 90 degrees to the left in order to see the Moselle River flow north as it actually does, and then you can see places like Modelange, Richemont and Moncy on there, which are today all clearly part of France. The significant change in the border between the 16th century and today is due to a series of boundary treaties, arbitrations and conventions. However, a small section between Mont-Saint-Martin and Hussigny-Gobranche dates back all the way to 1602 and was also the border during the time when Germany held the western French region of Lorraine. We already talked about this in our video on the German borders, so be sure to check that out. But to quickly recap, between 1871, the year Germany was unified by Prussia after the Franco-Prussian War, and 1918, the end of World War I, Germany held Alsace-Lorraine. This means that we'll date the remaining part of France's border to Luxembourg and 1918, even though we acknowledge that France did not have de facto control here during World War II and German occupation. Next we have the German border, also obviously included in our Germany video. The northernmost part of the Franco-German border is also the youngest, as the Saarland, today a German state, was a French protectorate after World War II, and a disputed territory that only joined the Federal Republic of Germany in 1957. And as for the rest of the border, it is subject to interpretation. France finally regained the region of Alsace-Lorraine, which had switched owners quite frequently in the centuries before, in 1945 at the end of World War II. But there is a case to be made that this border, or at least part of it, goes back to the Peace of Westphalia in 1648, which defined the Rhine as the border between the two countries, which it still forms today, at least for the southern part. France's border towards Switzerland is somewhat tricky. From the tri-point town of Basel onwards, the Rhine leaves the French borders and forms the border between Germany and Switzerland. Although there was a Franco-Swiss border here in the past, it now goes back to France regaining the Alsace region, so the first bit of the border has existed since 1918, but on a map from Napoleonic times, we can see that Mulhouse was a border region towards Switzerland way before that. The canton of Jura was given to Bern for having lost Vaud, further south in the Vienna Congress of 1815, and Neuchâtel wholly only joined Switzerland in the same year. What is today the canton of Vaud was separated from Bern by Napoleon, rejoining the reinstalled Swiss Federation in 1803. But having been invaded by Bern in 1538, there is some ambiguity here. Finally, Geneva and Valais joined Switzerland in 1815 as well, and have bordered France ever since then. The border towards Italy starts at the quite natural border of Mont Blanc, the highest mountain of Europe. This constitutes a fairly recent border, as the highly historically relevant Duchy of Savoy, the region between Lake Geneva, Lac de Bourget and Mont Blanc, used to belong to the Kingdom of Piedmont-Sardinia, the Italian state successfully unifying the country in 1861. It was only a year before Italian unification, in 1860, that Savoy was given to France in the Treaty of Turin. The same happened, more controversially, as it had a clear Italian-speaking majority with the country of Nice, which also happened to be part of France since 1860. Piedmont-Sardinia gifted these rich lands to Napoleon III of France to buy themselves his support for Italian unification, a gamble that actually paid off eventually, as just a year later, the modern Kingdom of Italy was proclaimed by Sardinian King Victor Emmanuel II. The part of the border between Savoy and Nice stems from at least the end of the Napoleonic Wars in 1814, but probably this was used as a more ancient border way before, as it follows the Cottian Alps and Monte Viso here, the massive mountain that is said to have inspired the Paramount logo. Fascist Italy also held parts of southern France during World War II, but they barely managed to hold that small region. They eventually got replaced there by Germans, and soon the French liberated those parts around the border. Not only that, it is a little known fact that the French actually extended their border here after World War II, claiming the towns of Tende, La Brique and Montgenèvre in the 1947 Treaty of Paris. Treaty of Paris. That sounds familiar. Before we move on to the longer, more visible Iberian border France has in the south, there is another border of metropolitan France one is tempted to forget about. The city-state of Monaco lies on the Mediterranean coast just east of Nice, and was thus until the Treaty of Turin that gave Nice to France a protectorate of Piedmont-Sardinia, soon to be Italy. Monaco's independence was formally recognised in 1861 through a treaty with France, which ceded most of Monaco's territory but ensured its sovereignty. So the city-state managed to avoid being incorporated into either Italy or France, but this came at the cost of most of its territory. The Grimaldi family, originally a prominent Genoese family, had ruled Monaco almost continuously since the 13th century, and the principality's independence is largely due to its ability to navigate alliances and treaties with larger powers, particularly France. From the beginning of its independence, it focused on tourism, and the famous Casino of Monte Carlo already opened in 1863. Today, Monaco is a sovereign city-state known for its wealth, luxury, and status as a tax haven, while maintaining a close but independent relationship with France. The border France shares with Spain in the south is above all a natural border, characterized by the Pyrenees separating the Iberian Peninsula from the rest of Europe. This highly natural course of the border is also the reason why there is a contestant for the oldest of France's borders. In fact, the border town of Fedeli, which is today France's last Mediterranean town before you enter Spain, was already mentioned around 43 AD by Roman cartographer Pomponius Mela as marking the limit of the Gauls, the predecessors of the French. This was even cited in the negotiations for the treaty we will use to date the modern border, the Treaty of the Pyrenees of 1659. This aptly named treaty was followed a year later, in 1660, by the Treaty of Ilvia, which transferred the Valley of Querol to France. The next important arbitration was an agreement in 1764, signed in Perpignan, specifying the boundary around Le Perthus. After this, there was a rare modern period of brutal war between the two countries, when Napoleon tried to invade Iberia in the so-called Peninsular War of 1807 to 1814. Later in the 19th century, Napoleon's nephew, Napoleon III, was more interested in cooperation with the Spanish, and in the Bayonne treaties, he once again formalized the border along the Pyrenees. These treaties also provided the legal base for the border markings. So following their provisions, the boundary between France and Spain is physically marked by 602 border stones indicating the exact line of division between the two countries. Finally, there was a land swap in 1984 to enable the construction of a road around Arret, in which a mutual transfer of 2,710 square meters was agreed upon. The last border of metropolitan France we need to discuss is again with quite a small country, even if it's not as tiny as Monaco. Andorra, a small landlocked nation in the Pyrenees between France and Spain, has a unique history and political structure. Established as a co-principality in 1278 through a feudal agreement between the Bishop of Urgell and the Count of Foix in France, it has maintained its quasi-independence for centuries. Even today, it has two heads of state. One is still the Bishop of Urgell, the second is the incumbent French president, right now Emmanuel Macron. Nevertheless, Andorra is a sovereign country and has a total of 57 kilometers of borders with France. Similarly to the Franco-Spanish border, this one also goes back to the 17th century. In 1607, the county of Foix was incorporated into the French royal domain, making the French head of state Andorra's co-prince, and the county's southern border Andorra's northern border towards France. So now that I've talked about all the borders of metropolitan France, there are still borders that France's overseas territories share with other nations. The first and most prominent of those is, of course, French Guiana. French Guiana, officially an overseas department and region of France, is located on the northeastern coast of South America, bordered by Brazil to the south and east, and Suriname to the west. It was colonized by France in 1630 by a group of settlers that would eventually establish a settlement at today's capital of Cayenne. In 1946, French Guiana was integrated as an overseas department of France, and today it is an integral part of the French Republic, known for its biodiversity and the European Space Agency's Guyana Space Centre, The final border France shares to another sovereign nation is on the small island of Saint Martin in the northeastern Caribbean. The island lies east of Puerto Rico, is about 87 square kilometers, and has a population of about 73,000 inhabitants. Oddly enough, the small island is divided roughly equally into a French part and a part that belongs to the Netherlands. The division dates back to the Treaty of Concordia of 1648 between the French and Dutch. Both nations wanted the island for its strategic location, but rather than engage in conflict, the two powers agreed to divide the island, with the French controlling the northern part, Saint-Martin, and the Dutch controlling the southern part, Sint-Maarten, which is how the island is administrated to this day. International borders on such small islands, history in bits.